Something that we do every day is walk. We walk to get to our desired places, such as stimulating subway and the bathroom, of course. But have you ever wondered how such a simple task requires so much physics? Well, it does, and that is what I'll be covering with you. Newton's third law of motion states that for every action force, there's an equal and opposite reaction force. Basically, if you were to punch, let's say, a dart, then the force that you apply on the fire's face will be the same force that will be applied back on your hand. Hence why your hand starts to hurt. To make things a bit more accurate, Newton's third law of motion's formula looks like this. F A on B equals F B on A. If we use this formula into the author getting punched scenario, then it will look something like this. F with a hand on author equals F with R on hand. This shows that both the forces are being applied to each other. Now that you understand the gist of Newton's third law of motion, let's move on to how us walking is related to Newton's third law. And when you walk, your foot pushes down on the floor and the floor pushes back up on your foot. So basically it would look something like this. F foot on floor equals F floor on foot. The force that you apply down on the ground will be the same force the ground applies on you. Next, when we walk, we apply a force in the backwards direction, which causes us to move forward, which is how we are able to walk. The friction is always opposite to the force applied. So our force applied would be when we move our foot forward, and then the friction applied would be in the opposite direction. We have learned two types of friction, which are static friction and kinetic friction. Ask yourself if you know the difference between this, but if you don't, then don't worry. Static friction is with the friction which slows down and eventually stops an object from moving. For example, let's pretend the car is just standing in one place. This will be what we call static friction because the car will just stay there unless someone pushes or pulls it. The formula for static friction would be Fs equals mu s Fm. Kinetic friction is the opposite of static friction. Kinetic friction allows movement to occur, and the formula would be Fk equals mu k Fn, where mu k is the coefficient of kinetic friction and Fn is the normal force between the two objects. Now that I've covered the differences between static and kinetic friction, which type of friction is used when we walk? When you wish to walk forward, you would plant your foot on the floor, and then use your muscles to apply a force backwards. If there was no surface, the force applied to your foot would cause it to accelerate in a backwards direction, thus cause you to slip. Because there is friction, the forces the static friction acts on your foot in the forward direction, balancing the force you apply. This causes your foot to be stationary. Overall, static friction would be the force that would allow us to walk. And lastly, Newton's second law of motion deals with the relationship between the force, mass, and the acceleration. Walking ties into Newton's second law of motion because when you walk, you create a net force by your mass and how much you are accelerating. This will look something like this. F net equals ma, where the net force would be equal to the mass times the acceleration. For example, George wants to calculate his net force with a mass of 45 kilograms and his acceleration being 9.8 meters per second squared. He would multiply his mass by his acceleration and get a net force of 440 newtons. Newton's second law is the only way a person would be able to calculate his or her net force while walking.
Gravity involves many aspects of physics, including Newton's first law of motion, traction, friction, and much more. Newton's first law of inertia. Newton said that an object at rest will stay at rest, and an object in motion will stay at motion, unless acted upon by an unbalanced outside force. Now let's apply this to driving. We all know how important it is to wear seatbelts, hopefully. Now consider this scenario. Ezra is driving her all-new Swagger wagon, rebelliously not wearing her seatbelt and listening to the Barney and Friends soundtrack. Not paying attention to the road ahead, she approaches a brick wall and a collision takes place. Upon contact with the wall, an unbalanced force acts upon the car, abruptly decelerating it to rest. When this happens, Ezra would no longer share the same state of motion as the car, causing her to be propelled from the car and thrown into the air. Her friend Athara, on the other hand, is following the rules like the good child she is and wearing her seatbelt. The same situation occurs, though when collision takes place, she would still share the same state of motion as the car because she's strapped tightly to it, hence avoiding her from flying through the car like Ezra. Therefore, that's how driving is related to Newton's first law of motion. The benefit of traction. What's traction, you might ask? Traction is the force that causes the moving mass to stick against the surface to traveling on. Now, how is it beneficial and how does it relate to driving? Well, traction control helps limit tire slipping during slippery conditions. In modern vehicles, the traction control system uses sensors to detect the speed of each wheel. If the system observes a wheel spinning faster than others, it automatically prompts the brakes of that wheel to slow it down. Some traction control systems also apply engine reduction to take power away from the wheel. Having a traction control system is essential for traveling in slippery environments, for it makes a great safety element to have in your vehicle. Frictional force needed for driving. As my friend Ezra mentioned earlier, there's two types of friction, static and kinetic. Static friction is the one responsible for getting an object to start moving or to come to a stop. The formula for that is Fs equals mu times Fn. Kinetic friction is the one responsible for keeping an object moving, and the formula for that is Fk equals mu k times Fm. Now, tying this back to driving, here's an example. As snow becomes hard and packed, it can become very dangerous. The coefficient of friction is then less than when the tires were on solid pavement, which means the force is not as effective in gripping the tires onto the ground as before. In this case, the car tires begin to slip as they try to grip onto the road, though the static friction is absent. As a result, the car tires spin in the snow. Therefore, these are
created using Powtoon.